It's a great pleasure to be able to join you today. This is home for me. For many years, the progress we've made in design has been directed toward user experience. When I went to Carnegie Mellon, we had a Department of Graphic Design and a Department of Industrial Design at an undergraduate level. We quickly created new interaction programs, which I think were the first in the world, although we're still having an argument with RCA about that. But our effort was to focus on the human interactions, individual typically, around computers to some degree, but we learned very quickly that, frankly, the human-computer interaction is a very small part of the kind of interaction we're really interested in. We're interested in the way people relate to other people. And that doesn't have to happen on flatland. It may be aided, but we operate in a different way. We talk together, we share, we do other things together. Now, I enjoyed my time at Carnegie Mellon, but there was a startle moment. I've gotten emails from so many people saying, why did you go to Weatherhead in Cleveland, for God's sake? Why would we go to Cleveland? And I want to explain that. And I'll do it because a personal story is relevant for what we're going to be talking about here. Late in my time at Carnegie Mellon, I had students who did a project for the city of Pittsburgh. And they went and presented, and it was a wonderful project. The kids at Carnegie Mellon are just awesome. They did a great job. The president of the city council took them out to lunch. Nice lunch, but he leans over says to one, it's a great project, but you know, it'll never get built. Can you imagine how devastating that is for an undergraduate who thinks that they've done outstanding design work, and of course everyone should embrace it? Well, they came back pretty disheartened, and I realized suddenly that we were making a big mistake in design education. We were not preparing students to work in organizations, to understand how things happen in collective interactions. Big, big mistake. So I began teaching a course called Design, Management, and Organizational Change. That was a popular course. I had lots of student enrollment in it. We did a lot of projects. We did what amounted to a significant portion of MBA work, frankly. We covered things that even in an MBA program, they don't quite get to. We did a lot of hard work. But I reached a point in my efforts there that I realized I couldn't get to Tepper to actually get into the business school enough at the heart of management. I talked to the president at Carnegie Mellon, and he said, yeah, if you need to go to Weatherhead and Case Western, that would be the right one because they're able to make adjustments. They got a reputation for doing new things. They've the first organizational behavior program, the first systems program. People like C. West Churchman, Russ Akoff, and others. So I went there and with great pleasure. So 5 years ago, this is my 5th year. And this is the origin of the title of my talk, Design from the Other Side. But I want you to understand there are 2 meanings of that word for me, and we're going to develop both sides of this. The other side, in part, is management. And I think that's a concern that runs through this room as you develop user experience as a significant, powerful part of the offerings of companies and government. That's the other side. But there's another other side. And I think the edge of that is where you're working right now. The other side is a new kind of design practice that you don't quite have yet. Whoa. Brandon said, Dick, you're controversial and provocative and you're going to give us trouble. I'm going to give you trouble. As wonderful as you are in developing user experience, and this really is one of my favorite firms of all, doing what we need to be doing, you're at the edge of a new kind of design practice where you move into organizations, build the organizations themselves. And you can't assume that your understanding of user experience is adequate to the new challenge you face. I notice a few heads nodding about this. Some of you know that this is the case. And you know, this has been the case through all of the other earlier practices of design. Wonderful practice, wonderful technical bench work, and you get to the edge of what that kind of design capability does, but it doesn't go further. Think of the move between graphic design and industrial, and the move from graphic, industrial into interaction. But now you're at the edge of another kind of design. I call this fourth order design. It's how we design the largest holes that human beings occupy. How do we design the systems and organizations in which we live and function? And that's why I'm at the Weatherhead. Because I want to understand how managers understand what we do as designers. I want to teach them what we do and also learn from them. So my reason for going to Weatherhead is twofold. First, I felt that managers need to understand the nature of products and services that we build and make. And frankly, a lot of managers do not understand the products of their companies. It's appalling in so many places. They just don't understand what a good product is. And I've tried to understand the reasons for that. There are some very significant reasons. But I went there not only to educate about product development and service user experience, I also went there to talk about how managers themselves can use design in their practice. That management itself is a kind of design discipline. Now, I assume that's troubling to a number of people. And Brandon, you're a little shaky right now, but it's okay. I got to tell you something. That beginning in the 20th century, up to where we are now, there have been about 12 movements in management, 12 schools of management that have unfolded. And each one of them has been a design movement. I promise you, has been a design movement. And here's the premise for this. They're all trying to figure out how do we make better, more effective organizations. Whether you're looking at Taylor or Mayo, yeah, you understand this very well. I know you do, because I know you're you're good. Yeah, you know what I mean. We've all been trying to make better organizations. And each of these schools of design has had a different theory of design. And you know, all of those theories of design, they fail to understand our approach to design. So when I talk to managers, they say, well, what is design? And I give them some description or explanation. And that's fine, that's all well and good. But in fact, they can't speak our language, and we don't do a very good job speaking their language. And that's going to become more and more a problem for us. We need to get over this. It was my experience at Carnegie Mellon that about 30 to 40% of our students had both the capability and the interest in moving beyond the narrow specializations of their design work. They wanted to move and were capable of moving off of the bench. I don't know what that is in this group, whether it's that much. Probably it is, because user experience takes us to places we didn't expect. But 30, 40%. Of those numbers, they're capable of moving into leadership in organizations if they're given the proper opportunity and preparation. So that's part of what my work at Weatherhead is about. We recruit actually a significant number of designers, and we're building now a new master's program in design and entrepreneurship with the Cleveland Institute of Art, which we think will be divided between Weatherhead and that institute, their design school. So we'll make some efforts in that regard too, trying to build leadership, entrepreneurship. And in fact, that leads me to the change of title, and I did want to talk just a moment for this. I don't want to make an ad. I hate when people come to conferences and promote their own stuff. I don't feel good about that. But I do want to tell you about this because I think it's a benchmark for our field. We've merged marketing, strategy, and information systems into a single new department to be called the Department of Design and Innovation. And I wanted to use this title so that you understand why we have that strange combination. Frankly, too many people do not understand what design is. They do have a sense of what innovation is. Innovation, I think, to them is an outcome. They want to see something new, different. Now, you and I know that innovation comes from the discovery of new ideas that occur in design, and design is the process, the activity. But we don't sell design necessarily to management. We want to tell them about innovation. How do you accomplish it? And that's what we spend a lot of time now, just as we bring this department together. That's going to be our focus too. Now, I teach courses for MBA students, many of whom have design background, for EMBA students, and for doctoral students. And it gives us a chance to have access to a lot of corporations and companies, which is a great place to learn about the limitations of design and the new kinds of design that we need to practice. Here's one of the traits of the MBA and of managers generally. You know this. Most of them are trained as analysts. They can analyze numbers. They are really serious analysts. And if you haven't run into the analysts in management and business, then you haven't dealt with management and business. For 30 or 40 years, the MBA programs have turned out legions of number crunchers, analysts. Very few of them have been taught or have the capability of synthesis. How do you create new things? Oh, you warned me this was a quiet audience. My God, it is. Geez, I thought there'd be already rocks thrown at me or something, but no, not yet. I'm real serious about this, and there's a reason for this. About 30, 35, maybe 40 years ago, we began to see the emergence of special consulting firms. Boston Consulting, well, you know the numbers, you know the folks. McKinsey? Is this not? Yeah, you know this, okay. And you know, there's an interesting book on this movement of consultancies. It's called The Lords of Strategy. I recommend this book to you very deeply. The Lords of Strategy, because this is an intellectual history of the business consulting movement. And what this book lays out, it's done by one of the editors of HBR, the Harvard Business Review. It lays out for each of the consultancies, they developed their own product that they wanted to sell to companies. And in succession, each one added a new wrinkle to the offering. But always it depended on crunching numbers. It depended on quantitative analysis. And always the focus was competitive advantage in gaining profit. MBA schools were suckers. They said, my God, if the companies want to do strategic planning in that way, and you want analysts, we'll turn them out. And they did. Year after year after year, they turned out people who were great in number crunching, quantitative analysis. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think you do. They also sold something else that should concern us a great deal. They sold the idea that a company exists to make profit. Now, 5 years ago, if I had said this to a group of business folks, I would have gotten some really nasty looks. But these days, when I talk to corporate folk, particularly at the highest levels, they seem to understand this. The purpose of an organization is to provide goods and services to people. Profit is important, and it's what sustains that operation. But coming back to those goods and services that we provide to people. That's one of the consequences of the strategy movement. I wonder if it's actually strategy. I suspect it's not. My own feeling is it's not. And that we as designers can practice a different kind of strategic thinking, which we will see more of later today, I think. I hope we'll get some of this. And frankly, this brings me to one of the most painful matters, and I'm going to go ahead and say this. I get into enough trouble as it is. I have to say that I'm troubled by the approach that's been taken by some design consultancies who try to sell their design practice in a series of steps, a kind of commoditization of design, as if you follow the 5 or 6 steps of a company with four letters would offer. Am I not being clear enough? I do know. Here's the kick. At the end of this book, on the Lords of Strategy, the author suddenly turns to a discussion of HR, human relations, people. He says, we've got to take the whole operation back to people. That's the real. I'm sorry, this guy doesn't understand where things are today. He did a great job of analyzing the history of business consulting. Great job. But he didn't get the message at the end. And the message at the end is that those companies like Boston Consulting, McKinsey, Deloitte, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, they were coming to me heavy in the 90s and later to hire designers. Why were they doing that? Well, the author of this book doesn't understand. He doesn't even recognize that that happened. But I know it happened, and I know why it happened. It happened because those earlier strategic planning consultancies had lots of plans, but they weren't executed. Yeah, I see nodding. You understand this very well. Exactly so. The plan sits on the shelf because they don't know what to do with it. And they were turning to design because we do know how to make things and make things happen. We have the ability to design the practices, the services, the actions that bring forward the changing vision and the competition that we will engender. That's what you do now. The consultancies needed help in execution, and we were to be their folks. What they didn't understand is that design is not just a method, a technique, a set of tricks. Design comes packaged with some principles and values. And I'm sorry, I don't have to agree with you in your particular version of values. You don't have to agree with me. But we do have some values, things that we think are important, and symbolized in this group by your concern for user experience. The user experience means a lot to us. It's at the core of what business experience should be in most sectors of business. That may still be controversial, but I'll tell you it's not among a lot of the folks I deal with. Let me take a minute and tell you a story about the Northeast Ohio. When I got those emails from people around the world saying, why are you going to Cleveland? Cleveland is like the end of an industrial era. Duh, yes. When things are at the end is when they have new beginnings. And I'll tell you, when I went there 5 years ago, it was an industrial culture. And don't forget, there is a lot of money in Cleveland, as there is in Pittsburgh. Because those folks like Rockefeller and Mellon and Carnegie, they were living there and they made tons of money and they turned it back into the community in museums and other matters. But here's the point. The organizations tended to be organized in strictly hierarchical power and control structures. Management was a matter of span of control. And here's how it manifested in the museums and not-for-profits. The great museum, the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is really one of the world's great museums, just amazing. Industrial culture, 5 years ago, they have art, and you're lucky to come and look at it. We'll set the walls high, you pay your membership, and you're lucky if you can have access. They couldn't care less about user experience. Yeah, it's so. And every museum that we dealt with. Here in University Circle, we have, in our area, we have the greatest concentration of cultural institutions in the space of a circle, so we have Conservatory of Music, a Botanical Garden, a great natural history museum, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the new Museum of Contemporary Art, yada, yada, yada. We've got a lot of those. Every one of them had this sense that we got something special and you're lucky to have access. 5 years later, Cleveland Museum of Art has a very different attitude. They have changed their cultural vision. Their concern now is with the quality of user experience. It's an amazing turnabout. We talked to the chief curator. You're doing work with them right now, aren't you? And they're turning over their data on user interactions. And 5 years ago, that would have been the last thing they would do, because they were who they were. Now they share that data because they're more concerned with what new things can be done. Well, here's the point. In this Northeast Ohio, we're watching a cultural change of great significance take place. I'll give you an example of a company for what I'm getting at. And this is the shift from what I call second order to third order. There's a company there called Dealer Tire, and they sell tires. They're a distributor of tires. You know, the things on cars. Is that an industrial product? Oh, yes. Akron's down the road and BF Goodrich and yada, yada. Yeah. And so there was an idea. let's sell tires in a different way. And they came to us to do a project. We had about 6 students, really bright MBAs, people I like, with some good design background. And the charge was design a website to sell the tires through dealerships. Oh, okay, a new kind of service. Well, the company didn't tell us what they were actually doing internally. One of the rare cases, they kept all that secret, and I thought there was a reason. I had a feeling there was a reason. But our students got busy working on the website. And you know how they organized the material for user experience? They said, well, tire is to be sold. A tire is an object. What are the dimensions of the object? Well, there are different sizes of wheels. There are different sizes of, and different qualities, different tread pattern, different manufacturers, different cars to use, different. The whole thing that the students were designing was built around the artifact, as if that was user experience. Bullshit. Think carefully what I'm talking about here. There had to be some other change take place. And they didn't tell us what was going on, but in fact, when we finally delivered our goods, something very unusual happened. Well, here's what happened with the students. First, I'll tell you this. The students began with this notion of the tire. And you organize the access to the site by all those features of tires. But they kept bumping into the wall, and it kept bumping against me, and I kept giving them a hard time. And I said, who gives a damn what the conditions of the tire are and so forth? That's not what your job is. Who needs a tire? Why do they need a tire? Where are they going? I said, let's do some profiles here. And I said, tell me some stories. And so we began to build profiles, and you all know about this. It's nothing new for this group. It's a big deal for some people, but it was no. So a mother, single mother, she has a flat tire. What do you do? Well, we began to see the students build this information structure that if you need a tire, what information do you need in order to make that selection? Well, at some point, as the students are just can't quite get to that. One day we came in and we sat down and said, look, you've got to get this straight. Tell me the story now. And as they started to tell the story, something had changed in their way of thinking. They suddenly inverted the whole site, and it became a user experience site. Well, we took this down to Dealer Tire. Dealer does about $1 billion worth of business a year. That's okay. We took it down. As it turns out, the company was well aware of this change. They were using us to smoke out new possibilities that they may have missed. They're projecting a business of $4 billion a year on this new approach. They're prototyping it in Dallas. They ran that prototype this past year. This is what's happening in the industrial base, a shift from artifact to experience. And we're teaching the managers how to design that kind of matter. Here are a couple of the things to keep in mind. I understand you all know what a value proposition is. Is that right? Everyone knows what a value proposition is. Well, we talk with our designers as well as with our MBA students, and here's what a value proposition is to us. The value proposition is the function of the product, the function that the product performs. It translates beautifully from design speak to management speak. Perfectly so. What's a business model? A business model is how you deliver the value proposition. What resources do you need? What skills and people do you need? What kind of organization of coordinated activities to then yield the outcome? And the resources deal with, and here's the big thing for your management side, you've got to understand the income stream, you've got to understand the cost structure. Now, I think everyone here understands that in pretty good terms, but I've been surprised how designers have lightened up to this, how they've warmed to this notion, because they hadn't been taught this before. Function, form, and so forth, but this was the change. And here's kind of the clue. Organizations are designed just as much as any other product. We design graphic communication. We design artifacts. We design the interactions that sometimes are carried on artifacts and sometimes not. but we also can design the organization. That's the edge of where you're working right now. I think the phrase is selling up. That's what I was told. Selling up is one of the big concerns you have. How do you move from being a technician, and I'm going to be insulting right now, how do you move from being a technician, the technical skills to make the wonderful things that you make, how do you move from that into management itself? By two steps. Either you persuade people to the value of what you produce, or you actually take over the management. You become a manager. How do you become a manager with a design background? Well, here's where I think we're going to see a slight issue rising, because some design schools are trying to teach strategy. CCAC here in this area is doing it. And there are some others that are doing it as well. I've got to say to you that I deliberately decided not to go into a design school to teach this, because there's a strength that lies in the MBA education that just can't be ignored. Something that you've got to be conscious of. The students coming out of a proper MBA program indeed have the analytic capability. They need to be able to crunch the numbers, and this is something you've got to find a way to deal with. They also can provide synthetic solutions to problems. So there's going to be a real competition between the design schools who attempt to produce managers and folks from proper business schools. Not many schools will do this, but already there's this is a movement around the world. I'm amazed at this. But Adaptive Path is positioned strategically to do something a little bit different. We won't see those people come online for another 5 to 10 years. And right now, the comment Brandon made, many of you are working in jobs where there was no one else in that position in the past. You're winging it. Well, here's the things to keep in mind. Understand that the value proposition is a powerful concept for design as well as the organization. You make a good argument in the organization if you can present the value proposition correctly. To do that, it has to be anchored in a proper understanding of a business model. And the model involves an income stream and a cost structure, but it also involves analyzing what other resources may be needed, the skills that are needed to sustain that, and what kind of structure and configuration is needed to finally deliver the value proposition. Those are matters that you're going to have to study more carefully, and I think that's really what MX is trying to do, trying to cultivate that ground. Because if you can pull this off, you will make a tremendous change in organizations, and God knows we need that change soon. We need it in the for-profits. We need it in the not-for-profits, and we need it in government. There's an area called public sector design that I have a great deal of interest in. We were talking earlier about our friends in Helsinki at the Design Lab. Their efforts in public sector design are really impressive. And I think public sector is an area that's going to come into the United States more strongly even than we've seen. But your ability to move up from, I guess I shouldn't call it bench design, the technical side of design and user experience. The ability to know how to do that, but then also to extend your skills into making your case as a business, as an organization. You're at the edge right now to be able to do that. How many of you, in fact, are working in areas where no one held your title before? Jesus Christ. Hold your hands up and look around you, everyone. Look at the extent of this. This is an amazing, even Daryl is working in an area where there was no one before you like that. Well, think of what that means for organizations. We've got to be very wise right now, because there are some sharks out there who will eat our lunch if we don't move wisely. Wisely means we need to understand fundamentally what a good business model is. Business model sounds like a stupid term. God, I used to get nuts over. Speaking management speak just drives me crazy. But I started to realize that the parallel between a product and an organization, it's not so tough. It's not so tough. It's actually kind of easier. And one that I like a lot, you know the form, function, materials, manner, theory of products. A product has to have several things. It's got to have the proper materials, it's got to have a form, the function has to be clear, and you've got to have some way to make it and to use it and so forth. A chair is an example of that. Yeah, that's classic Moholy-Nagy. Classic Moholy-Nagy. Same thing works for services and experiences generally. It also holds for the organization itself. There's no great mystery. There are the resources needed, and they come from the business stream. There are a set of skills and capabilities that people have that are suited and relevant, and so forth. Here's the one that interests me a great deal, and that I think is quite relevant to what you do. As designers, we appreciate form deeply. Now, I assume that everyone here has read Goffman's work on interaction, that everyone has read John Dewey's absolutely seminal piece on it called Having an Experience, that this is like mother's milk to you, that you know this literature cold. I just assume that. I mean, who would practice in this field without knowing that literature? I got a laugh out of people. I couldn't believe I would get a laugh out of people. I do recommend that you go read. There's a book called Art as Experience, chapter 6, called Having an Experience. It is the foundation text for user experience design. Man, Dewey is cool on this, I gotta tell you. Goffman also, you know about Goffman. He's the facial engagement guy. And he structures the user experience as initiation, maintenance, and leave taking. Yeah, that's cool. That's great. That's great. Good. What I want to say is that what should interest you as budding, emerging managers is the concern for the form of an organization. Now, I want you to think carefully on this one. And I didn't bring any slides because I don't like to use PowerPoint. Others probably will, but I don't. So help me out here. Imagine in your mind what I call the triangle of doom. Oh, some student back at Carnegie, some smart-ass student at Carnegie Mellon talks about the cross of pain and the triangle of doom. Jamin, where are you? You know this very well. Yes, I know you know about this. The triangle of doom sits around form. Sits around form. Form is it's how we're going to carry this value proposition. Form has 3 elements that most business school people don't get because they're not as well educated as you are. On the one hand, there has to be a logical structure to a product. If it's an information architecture or that the chair doesn't fall down because of engineering principles, it's got to have some technological, well, you know, that operates in business too. There's an intelligence in that form. I'll come back to that one in a minute. The other 2 in the triangle of doom, one is it's got to have ethos or character. Character, you know very well, translates into brand. It's the voice of a product. It's the issues of integrity. It's those things about people that our Supreme Court says that organizations are people, but they're foolish. Anyway. But in any case, this triangle of doom, intelligence, character, but over here, in addition, there is this third part, which we call pathos, emotion. Now, we know that from industrial design. You know it from service. Service is going to involve some logical structure of matters that you need. It's going to involve some aspects of voice or tone of voice in a website or whatever it may be. It's also got to engage emotion. Well, this happens in organizations as well, and big time. Pathos in the organization is how the organization accesses and engages customers, really all people. What is customer relations? What is the service we provide? I'm going to make a footnote here, if you don't mind. I'm going to just sort of hold the thought for a second. How many of you know what an affordance is? Pretty good, pretty good. Well, I got a different idea about what an affordance is, I'll bet, than most of you. Oh, Laura, am I going off in the wrong direction for this? You know, I was thinking about affordances. I know the classic work, Gibson and so forth. I studied all that. And I suddenly realized that we got the idea of affordance mixed up. Here's my notion of what affordance is. Affordance is how we gain access to the form of a product. Affordance is how we gain access to the form of the product. I'll give you an example of this. Do you all know the poem by Dylan Thomas called Under Milkwood? Does anyone know that film, that play for voices? Almost you. Do you know it? Oh, you heard of it. Oh, geez, okay. It's a really wonderful play. It's all voices that Dylan Thomas creates, and it's one of the great poems of the 20th century. And you know, Richard Burton, the great actor, reads this. He reads this, and it's available through BBC and elsewhere. In fact, I just got another copy myself. And I'm thinking about this, and you know, Richard Burton gives us access to the form of that poem because his ability to speak in a voice that makes me feel what the character is going through, that's an affordance. Oh, Jesus, I never thought about that before. We know that in drama. It's how the actor delivers the goods. Can they capture the quality of character and voice and meaning? That's an affordance. And in business, whoa, what do we do about customer relations? Customer services. Whoa, that's what you guys do. That's what you do. A company that fails to understand that the affordances you create are the access to their company. Oh, that's big stuff. They don't always realize how important it is. I called my bank the other day. It took me 4 screens of levels of information, 3 or 4 robot voices, and then I got cut off a couple of times. I was going nuts. I was saying, I think I'm going to change my bank. I don't have engagement. Well, I don't want to get poetic about this issue of affordance because I want to carry it a little bit differently. Here's something else that we concern ourselves a lot with in management. There are 3 big things that the intelligence of an organization has to work out. They've got to understand the vision of the organization. They've got to understand the mission, and they've got to understand the operating values. And I want to be real careful in describing this because it's easy to get it screwed up big time. In fact, we're going through a strategic planning process at my institution, and they've got it ass backwards. I don't know what it is. Think of the common sense. In any organization, you've got to think about the future. Vision is not about my organization. Vision is about what the world's going to be like in 5 years or 10 years. That's the serious visioning. It's not creating and saying, oh, we're going to have a wonderful company that's going to make great profits and do good things. Oh, bull. That's not what vision is about. Vision is to say the world in 5 years is going to be a little different. And here's what we think it's going to be like. And frankly, it's going to take a strategic conversation to find that vision. It's not these stupid vanilla propositions that are put out by so many companies. No, it's something much harder and much more significant. Mission. Mission is what we've got to do to function in that future. Not just function, but flourish and shape the future. What's the mission of my organization? What do we have the capability of doing? Managers think about this. The third term I think is also relevant, and by the way, this is captured in a book by Peter Senge called The Fifth Discipline, and I recommend that very highly. I don't agree with everything that Peter says, but he's an estimable man. Good for managers. By the way, his notion of manager is designer. Not a power and control figure, but a facilitator. Somebody who helps others get things done. It's not a bad notion. Operating values. Operating values are the things that we need to value most centrally as we do our work. I don't mean values in some vague sense of, well, we think creativity is great, no. I mean, how do we treat each other? What are the actual operating values? We like to work together. We like to listen. This itself is ground for a strategic conversation, a healthy discussion in an organization. Say, what are the 3 or 4 things that we value more than anything else in how we work together? You start out that kind of conversation with maybe 20 or 30, but you keep talking. And you realize that some things are connected, and gradually the list reduction brings you down to just a few things that are so valuable for your community that they can't go away. You follow those as a manager, you're in good shape. Take the time to do that. So these are the matters that I think, as you move into management, you've got to be aware of. If you aren't shaping this, somebody is in the organization. Be aware of that. What's the vision of the organization? We teach this to our students. Find the vision. Not the bold they put on the website, but go down into the materials and tell me what the vision is. Figure out what the mission is. Why is this, even in a multi-faceted organization, where they may be doing tires and God knows what else, baby bottles or something. How does that all fit together? What's that story there? What's the intelligence that holds us together? There is an area of management called organization design, and I do a little bit of that. A man named Galbraith does a lot about the configuration of industries. Galbraith is estimable. He's a follower of Herb Simon, and that's not entirely good, but not entirely bad either. Galbraith is good. But understanding the configuration, as you move into an organization, how should it be set up? Distributed? Or localized? These are the matters that concern me. And I guess if I had one central point on this, it would be that as we move up the food chain into more serious engagements with our organizations, we need to start thinking about this from the standpoint of a true manager. And that's just another kind of design, another level to grow to. And not everyone wants to do that. God, not everyone wants to do that. That's fine. Some people, there's an area that you're really good in, you stay there, that's fine. But there's a filtering process that gradually brings us forward, that some people will step forward and want to do this. They've got something in them that's about people. And I'll say again, our organizations are in big trouble. Everywhere. Everywhere they're in trouble. They're in trouble for 2 or 3 reasons. One, the population has gotten huge, and our organizations can't accommodate in their current configurations the size that we have to deal with. They just can't. We need to think of new ways, design new organizations. Technology, more complex, much more complex. For the good and for the bad, we've got to think about that too. There are a couple of other factors in the change of organizations, but these are ones that I would keep in mind. So I guess these are my key points, that as you move up into management, you're becoming another kind of designer. My guess is that within 10 years, a significant portion of this room will have quite different job titles and much more expanded responsibilities. I do want to add one further point. Entrepreneurship, this notion of innovation. Peter Drucker wrote a great book on innovation and entrepreneurship. It's the text. It's a short book. And I think if Drucker had known about design as we understand it today, he would have written this very explicitly in his definitions. But his notion is that innovation, not merely in the companies, but in our public sector, public service, not-for-profits, would be so important for us. So this notion of entrepreneurship, I'm wondering when Adaptive Path will begin to spin off companies of its own. Dangerous ground? Oh, don't go there. Oh, did I? Oh. Well, I'll tell you, back in the 90s, there was a movement in many, not many, but quite a number of industrial design firms to spin off companies. They got tired of creating products for companies where the companies didn't make the products. They buried them, so they started to send out some of their own. Some of those were very successful. I think Lunar has done a nice job in this. Changing relationships in organizations. We need a lot of imagination about how to make this happen well for us. I've spoken way too long. I really appreciate the chance to come back. Like I said, I think this is home for me. And it's a funny thing, when you come home, you recognize the folks, but then you say, you know, I've been other places, and here's some things to think about. So I hope you're mad enough to ask me questions. Got any questions for me? Oh, did I really bore you? I'm so... You're right, they're a very quiet audience. And having had lunch, no, seriously, there's got to be some question from someone, and not you, Daryl, don't ask me a question. Yes? Say a little louder. How do you quantify innovation? Well, you know, this is a big challenge for us because we have, in the business school climate, there are ways to quantify. It scares me, but I would say measure, not quantify, because measurement could be qualitative and it can be quantitative. And I have no problem with qualitative measurement. Esteem in which you're held, the respect that your new ideas generate. Maybe there's a quantitative side to that, but it can be measured. You don't believe that, do you? Oh, you're a hardcore designer. Oh, I had a hard time with this one too. And so when I was at Carnegie Mellon, they said, have the measures of the development of your programs. And I thought, shit, I can't measure any of that. Geez. But I got to thinking about it. You know, there are qualitative things like the respect in which you're held, where people go who take your degrees. Those things count. That's a nice question. There's a whole conference around that, I'll tell you. Come and visit us and we'll bring you to the conference. How about another one? Yes?
A lot of organizations, upper management, I think, use design as cosmetics.
Yes.
For the free picture. But I hear you talking about sort of business design, strategy design, experience design, process design. How would you explain that more quickly so management understand the encompass?
I spend a huge amount of my time doing just that, trying to explain to high level, the C level, what design does. And I would say that it's my experience that I'm finding more traction than I did, say, 5 years ago. They're still puzzled, but we're getting some traction. I was at a meeting with a corporate board, and we had another faculty member from our finance department there, and the question on the board was, what's design? And the guy from finance said, let me answer that. And I'm going, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I tell you, he gave an explanation of design that was really inspiring. He got it somehow. And I don't know what's going on at Weatherhead, but the people in other areas seem to be getting it. And it's his ability to tell that story that made it powerful for us. We just had a meeting with our corporate visiting board, and I was presenting some of the ideas, and I just tossed out a couple of phrases and words, and suddenly the whole group is discussing this. And they're talking about what is design, and they're saying, what about innovation? And I got to tell you that at the higher levels of organizations, I'm surprised how receptive they are. Maybe 10 or maybe 15 years ago, I worked in Australia with the government, redesigning the Australian taxation system. I worked with Tony Goldsby-Smith and some other very good people. And I'll tell you, that was an amazing experience. But the effort on our part was to embed design as a capability in the organization. And that was picked up by their middle managers and carried forward. Design in organizations needs a champion. There is no question about that. They need to be placed high. Middle managers are under incredible stress, and they're the most resistant, I find, to design ideas. Oh, I'm seeing lots of nods on this one. Yeah, middle management, if you think about it, they're caught in the squeeze. So at the high level, they get it, or they're getting it more. Employees, some, but it's that middle management thing. So we've got to be very careful. And one of the things that I advise very much in this is do co-design. In fact, I think our next speech is going to be on participatory. And by that, I would say, how do you find a way to bring those middle managers into the process? Slowly teaching them. Even if you don't use the word design, give them different ways of working together. And as a quick example, I think our organizational behavior department is ranked 3rd in the world or something, or whatever that is. But I don't think they teach teamwork the way I do it in design. I think I do it better. And I always use this as a practice in management. Whatever team you have, make sure that there's a leader whose job is to keep you on track for the purpose of that meeting, a facilitator, and a scribe. And hopefully there's a big whiteboard so that it's a public scribing. And then in every meeting, rotate those roles. We teach that to our students. Get in this swing of how we interact together. Get in this swing so that the middle managers don't feel quite so pressured. They can watch other people carry the load in meetings. I find this to be pretty effective. Because my real interest is how do we embed design in organizations? Teach managers, sure. Give them different practices also. Is that speaking to your question? Oh, an elevator speech. Well, you'll know me now. I don't give elevator speeches. Honestly. They do get it more. Oh, we've run into that, of course, and we've seen things change in the United States from, say, the early 90s. There's more of a consciousness of design, but we're now talking about a much more sophisticated level of design practice. And I do think that there's more receptivity in this. And I wouldn't worry about an elevator phrase for it. The leaders know that things need to be better. The competition says there must be innovation. And you hold out a way of working, that's attractive. They're willing to try it. I've been surprised how often. So I'll go here and then back to here. Is that okay?
Okay, so the crux of your message is around shift our thinking to like design our organization,
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are in.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That's really good.
We're within a department.
Yeah.
So how, and that would be very narrow. Like if we're designing our department,
Yeah.
that's really not having much of an impact. We need to be at a.
No. If
Higher
you
level.
design your operation well, that will be the beginnings of an impact. But look for the opportunities to go further. I had a great conversation with Zorab Khashoggi and he told this story about working with FedEx. They had been brought in to design new handheld elements for the FedEx drivers, and they did typically great work. You know those folks. But there came a time when FedEx was in some trouble. It happened to coincide with the delivery of these great handheld devices with new information architecture and so. So the company turned to him and said, would you think about this? You've been doing some work. Why don't you think about this issue of a possible merger and what the future might be? Well, Zorab's not stupid. Zorab had already been thinking about this. But he knows that designers often have to get in the door with a small project. And they do that well, they'll be invited back. And they were invited back. That's, I guess, my message. Every time you have a meeting, you have a chance to practice as a designer in that meeting, you make a difference. I'm seeing from the graybeards and the wise people here, they're going, yes, that's it. We start out with these small projects, and we do them well, and then I don't know what else to do. I had the same troubles at Carnegie Mellon. We had a computer science department that is like the best in the cosmos. God comes to those folks to figure out how to send them information. Well, I had the dean of computer science come to me, and he said, Deke, we find that our projects are not as good unless we have design students among us. And I said, well, there may be a reason for that. Why don't we discuss that more? He's a real honest man, and very respected in voice recognition and stuff. Raj Reddy. And Raj always after that found a way to include us in the processes and activities. I served on the steering committee for the HCII, the Human Computer Interaction Institute, because he knew that we had a seat at the table. We'd done good work. And I guess that's my message here. You do good work, but you keep your ears out for opportunity. And if you behave that way, you will get a hearing.
So I think you just answered part of that in my question with your last answer, but maybe if there's anything else that you would add to that in terms of the sort of top-down approach versus a bottom-up approach, because I think as managers, a lot of us tend to be in the middle. So focusing, you talked about convincing executives, and you talk about doing good work so you get a seat at the table. Is there anything else you would add to that?
I will add something else. I'm going to say something a little strange here. I deal with a lot of folks who are very much interested in systems. They're what they call systems thinkers. I got this weird idea about what a system is, and my notion is that it's impossible for a human being to experience a system. You nod your head, but you didn't hear what I said. I tell you, there are people who would burn me in effigy and maybe at the stake to say that you don't experience a system. Dick, what's wrong with you? Are you stupid? God, we're in systems all the time. No, but we have an artificial way of characterizing systems and organizations. I never experienced the totality of the system. I experienced my pathway through it. The solar system has gone on and on and on and on and on. I've been around this for, a few cycles of the sun. More than I care to admit. But only a few. So I don't know the whole system. I make fancy projections of what it is, and I guess, and I hope, but I don't know. It's the personal pathway through. And that's why when I look at organizations, I say, let's follow the pathway through this. Management has a tendency to think it understands everything. Wise management doesn't. And so maybe this is a way to speak to what you're getting at. Middle managers are crushed. Folks at the top think they know what they're doing. Folks down there who are doing the work have a different point of view. I'd say that I'd be careful to know what an organization really is. It drives me nuts, our organization folks at Weatherhead who have these firm notions of what an organization is. I don't think we know. They go through these changes. Maybe there's another way to answer the question this way. And pay attention to this one. This one is kind of strange. Kind of. Oh, I heard that laugh. No, this one is kind of strange. The culture of an organization. A good way to analyze the culture of an organization is to realize that there is a dominant culture, there is a residual culture, and there is an emergent culture. Dominant culture is what you're doing currently at Adaptive Path. My guess is that there are probably a few of you who, Adaptive Path isn't so old that you have lots of residual, but there's probably some earlier practices for when Adaptive Path first came to be. Now we call those residual, traces of the past. But I think this conference is about emergent practices, things that are going to be new that will someday become dominant, but that are just beginning to emerge. That's the way organizations are too. There is a dominant culture. There is certainly a residual culture, the old timers. But there are these new ideas, and that's called emergent. And I guess that's where we are as designers. Maybe that's another way of saying it. You've been awful patient on this. Do you want to? Yeah, shoot. Oh, here. No, here. No, okay.
All right, I have tons of questions, but I'll start out with a straightforward one. I'm currently reading John Cotter's book on leading change.
Yes.
And he talks about you could start small, but really that change has to be initiated from the C-suite. So just thoughts on that, agree, disagree?
Well, maybe I can say it this way. There is a great paradox in this, and paradox means a lot to me. A paradox, you know what a paradox is? A paradox is, well, what is a paradox? What's a paradox? Oh, two things to consider at once, yeah. And usually with paradox, they have the appearance of a contradiction. But paradoxes aren't actually contradictory. They just look like they're contradictions. And so as you do the work to understand them, you realize they're not really contradictory. So there's a great paradox in leadership, particularly in what I'm calling fourth order leadership. Peter Senge says that the manager the leader, has to be a facilitator. He's a designer. She does the work of facilitating the work of others. Well, I'm thinking, what happened to power and control? It's a paradox that somehow you lead and you follow. That's the nature of the organization, a good organization. It's got these paradoxes built in, that the change has to come from the top, and yet if it comes from the top, it won't work. So it's got to come from the bottom. If it comes from the bottom, it's not. Our work in design is to reconcile those. Is that a little bit hard? That's a little far? It's a step. Okay, you're ready for yours now. You're set.
All right, so not sure if my question will make sense, but
Sure
based
will.
on what you described today, I feel like, okay, so business goals are being taught more design or design thinking, and then creatives are being taught more business. And so that leaves me at a point where when I look at where I'm at in my career, I feel further from my origin as a creative.
Yeah.
And then I'll see like the B-School person next to me
Oh.
who they are still very close to their origin.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure how
It's
to
a nice way of
navigate.
saying it. It's a great way to put the question. I guess my message is slightly different. I don't like the word creatives because everybody's creative in some way. My message is this, that you're creative in some area of design, and there are other designers who work in very different applications and have different understanding, and they're also creative. Sometimes they're not as efficient as we are because we've got some techniques and ways of working that are really cool. But some of those other designers are starting to get the message, and they want to use our practices too. So it's not as if those other folks, the other side, remember the title of the lecture is Design from the Other Side? The other side is designers too. Just that they don't have quite the same discipline and language that we do, you and I. So you're not left out of it. That's the curious synthesis that we see happening around us everywhere. Foundations, for instance, coming to us for work in design. I had a meeting at the UN with a number of people discussing how do you use design in the design of UN operations. What a strange thing to do. Government, the project in Australia. Whoa. Oh, and she's telling me we've got to stop because they're running out of tape or something. Is that right? Yeah. Hey, I really appreciate the chance to come. To me, this is at the edge of where design is, seriously. That's where you're working. I don't know if I helped very much today, but I really enjoyed talking with you, so thank you very much.